All right, everybody, we are at the top of the hour. Welcome to Goodbye SWOT. I'm Karla Raines, your host for today, a creator of Differentiation Zone, where creativity meets strategy. And let's practice our best royal waves, your best Meghan Markle. Get ready to say goodbye to SWOT. Now, I said goodbye to SWOT about 10 years ago. And I was inspired to say goodbye to SWOT because I found it just didn't do enough for me when I was setting strategy for my clients. And I found myself over the years being a bit surprised when clients would automatically say to me, "Hey, Karla, are we doing the SWOT? Where's the SWOT? What about the SWOT?" Even though we were proposing something that was more robust. And so I thought, well, gosh, Karla, let's kind of tackle this, take on the old venerable SWOT, and let's propose something that's more viable, vital, and relevant for today. And so today, my friends, we will unpack SWOT. We'll talk about what it is, what it does, what it simply can't do, and what you really, really need. And so let's put SWOT in context. Imagine it's 1960. Some of us on this webinar remember 1960. We remember growing up in the 60s when access to information was defined by Encyclopedia Britannica. And guess what? Those 25 volumes lived on your parents' shelf, your grandparents' shelf, or your public library for about 10 years. Because the pace of change, the change in information was that slow. Let's also think about when SWOT was created in terms of who were the Fortune top 10 companies in the United States. I pulled the list today, and I was struck to see who was on the list because I quite frankly hadn't thought about it in a very long time. And so if we were going to do this as an activity, I might say, well, who would guess a company that was on the Fortune top 10 list back in 1960? And let's use the chat and see if anybody has an idea or wants to wager a guess as to what a top 1 or 5 or 10 company might have been in 1960. Anybody wants to take a try? Feel free to tap it right into the chat. IBM, GM, Xerox, great. Anybody else? RCA or GE, very good, very good. I'll start at the top. General Motors, Exxon Mobil, Ford Motor, GE, General Electric, US Steel at number 5, Mobil at number 6, Gulf Oil, Texaco, Chrysler, S-Mark, AT&T, DuPont, Bethlehem Steel, Amoco, CBS, Armour, General Dynamics, Shell Oil, Boeing, and Kraft rounded out the top 20. And in the top 10, what do we have? Oil and gas, steel, heavy industrials primarily. So if you were running one of those companies in 1960, plus or minus, and you were setting strategy there or in a government organization or another, you can imagine that a tool like SWOT was just fine because, again, the pace of change was so much different. We weren't talking about disruptions then at all. And so when we think about a tool like SWOT being used to set strategy, either branding and marketing strategy, I know we've got brand and marketing consultants joining us on the webinar today, as well as individuals like me setting organizational or corporate strategy, either as a consultant or as an executive. We know what we're doing is we're trying to determine which strategic direction is going to really be optimal for our organization. And we're relying on a tool like SWOT to help us understand the external context in which we're operating so we can make the best strategic decision for our organization's future. And setting that singular direction, and I would advise us today, we're really talking about a direction that is differentiated from our rivals or peers or contemporaries. We really need to understand what sets us apart and where the puck is going, as they always say, in terms of changes in the external environment. And so what SWOT does is it really lays out the world for us in kind of two big areas. We look at ourselves, right? And we look beyond ourselves. And so what SWOT attempts to do is hit a balance between the internal and the external. And so it continues then to break that down with strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We all have a keener eye, I believe, today towards the importance of design and language. And what I think is interesting with SWOT just out of the gate is to consider the design. What's kind of top of the line and what's kind of below the midpoint. We're starting out looking at ourselves and identifying strengths and weaknesses. And we're using that then to think about opportunities and threats in the external environment. I don't know about you, but in all the years that I've used SWOT back in the day, it was easy to frame opportunities and threats once we really started thinking about our own organization. And quite frankly, it can invite a bit of bias, right, or preference, that we see the external world through our own eyes as we think about our own strengths and weaknesses. And so if we were to look at a SWOT for your own organization or an organization, perhaps you're on the board of directors or one of your current clients, we're going to see some classic kind of attributes that show up in the different quadrants of our SWOT. So under strengths, it's often that we see our people. Under weaknesses, most organizations are struggling with data. Opportunities, so many of us feel that we're the best kept secret and we're wondering how we can reach the hearts and minds of so many more people. And a threat, often funding shows up, right? We're looking to see how we can garner more revenue to support our organization. And so as we think about each of these four quadrants, what I'm going to invite us to do as a team is think about what might be in each of these four corners. So we think about strengths. And again, if you think about an organization that you know, if you think about what else might show up in addition to people, what might you see? So let's type in some ideas here into the chat and just share with each other, what are some other common strengths that we see when we're filling out our SWOT analysis? Often we'll see, again, people. We might have just invested in something in our organization. Maybe we've expanded our building, or we've been investing in technology. Those are some other strengths that might show up. Culture might show up. Any other ideas from colleagues? Okay, folks are being shy so far. Weaknesses, partnerships, excellent. Partnerships can show up as a strength, very good. Weaknesses, processes can show up as a strength, excellent, thank you. Any other ideas for strengths? Often, again, we're thinking about internal capabilities, right? Weaknesses, data. What else often shows up as a weakness in organizations when we're completing our SWOT analysis? Might be systems sometimes show up over here, right? Processes might show up over as a weakness. Anything else that we're thinking about as a weakness? There we go. Succession planning, board support, poor messaging, capacity. Some folks talk about tactics, excellent. So we can see a variety of strengths and weaknesses. We might not have enough redundancy in our processes to ensure everything works when something goes wrong, right? Thank you. Opportunities. I listed best kept secret, right? Who doesn't want to be better recognized? What are some other classic opportunities that we might see in a SWOT analysis? Any other ideas here for us? Partnerships, mergers, clarity of purpose, priorities. Awesome. And then over to threats. I listed funding. Again, most of us are looking for new ways to secure revenue for our organizations. Might be threat of new entrants to our market. Other threats that we often see. What are folks seeing here for threats? Anything else here for threats? Maybe public policy changes depending on the kind of space that you're in. Something else with that. And so what I want to suggest to us is that oftentimes, if we step back and really take a critical eye to our SWOT analysis, we'll find that we've got a lot of strengths and not as many weaknesses, opportunities, or threats. And so whether or not it's because our length of strengths or list of strengths, if you will, is that much longer, or if we really, again, take a keen eye and I realize that what we put in the other categories are actually strengths too. Others are probably seeing this as well. So that our SWOT analysis, if again, we take a critical eye, looks a little bit more like this. Anybody else see this over time? This is what I've often seen, right? Especially if I get to look at a SWOT analysis from past years, or maybe I have come in on a process and a client has already engaged in their SWOT analysis. It looks a lot more like this, or like my prior slide, like that. Others seeing that too? And again, I think it's natural because we start out thinking about ourselves. And in the nature of a SWOT analysis, we're often doing this in a collaborative process. And we want to feel good about ourselves, right? We want to feel good about our staff. It's easy to pick on the board if we're in a nonprofit, right? But we certainly want to feel good about the other elements of our organization. And again, what I want to have us be thinking about today is that if we're setting strategy and we really need to have a keen eye on the world around us, our SWOT analysis is failing us from the beginning, and we often don't know why. Because we're doing a little bit too much of this and not enough of this. So, what to do? Let's explore. I have pulled together a list of what I see as 4 major shortcomings for SWOT, and we'll go through those together. 4 shortcomings. Number 1, autopilot, phoning it in. Number 2, oversimplifying. 3, the tendency to follow the bright, shiny object. Number 4, what I call the lull factor. Let's start out with the first one. Okay, let's do our SWOT again. Autopilot. So often I see autopilot happening right from the beginning of a SWOT process, almost coming automatically from the, hey, let's just get that done. And it's as if we can dust off the SWOT we did last year and just do a little bit of updating. And I've got to say, if we're setting strategy, again, for brand or for an organization, and we're beginning with a bit of a snooze fest, right, which autopilot certainly means, it can be very challenging then to get to bold ideas, to get to innovation, to get to kind of challenging and critical concepts if we're already, quite frankly, phoning it in. Number 2, I think just in the very simple bracketing of information that is the cornerstone of SWOT, it's easy to oversimplify. It's easy to bucket into concepts like capacity or process or best kept secret or staff, or something like that. And as we oversimplify, we lose the nuance of the meaning and the power of the through line of the trend, force, or condition that is most likely to drive or shape our future. Whenever I've been engaged in a SWOT analysis, I know we've had to look out for the bright, shiny object. That big kind of shift in the external environment, it might be the hot topic, whatever now is trending on Twitter, that takes everybody's eye off the prize and gets us talking about a topic that is fundamentally unimportant to our organization. And so bright, shiny objects will kind of pop up. We kind of go down the rabbit hole and talk about them, even though they often are not germane to our industry, our organization, our markets, or our customer. So we have to watch out for the bright shinies. And what I have found with SWOT, and is, quite frankly, one of my biggest concerns, is that it lulls us into thinking we've covered everything important. We've filled out the SWOT, right? We've thought it all through. Let's just, quite frankly, move on to planning. Ta-da, there it is, all filled out, we're ready to go. And so what happens with those 4 shortcomings? We're done, right? Well, maybe we've missed something important. Here's what I think is one of the biggest challenges of using SWOT today. And again, one of the reasons I don't use it anymore. Number 1, SWOT simply isn't creative. If we are bucketing information into 4 simple categories, if we're kind of phoning it in, if we're finding ourselves easily distracted, and we're getting lulled into thinking that we've covered everything important, we most likely are not harnessing our creative energy and our ideas to advance our organization. And without creativity, we're not going to have an aha moment. We're not going to have those bold and unique insights that can really drive strategy, and in particular, the differentiation strategy today. And without creativity and without insights, we're not going to deliver on a wow. We're simply not going to get there. And so let's pause for a moment here, colleagues, and see if anybody has any questions for us so far as we have been unpacking the SWOT and talking about these 4 major shortcomings. Anybody have anything for us in the chat? All right, let's see if anything pops up. As you all have a chance to kind of think that through a little bit, as we know right now, especially in 2020, it's so important to be creative, to be innovative, to be finding a bold new ideas. Because we know that in order to pivot and do more than pivot through 2020, we need to be thinking beyond 2021 and into 2022. Oh, good. No questions, but it's getting your ideas turning. So again, I would encourage all of you, and it'd be fun if we were together in a room, I'd say, fill out a SWOT and swap it with a neighbor and see if your SWOTs aren't essentially the same. And I would say, my friends, if they are, that's a fundamental problem, because we cannot set a defining strategy when in essence, our summary of our organization's strategic position is the equivalent of somebody else's, right? It's a problem. So what to do? Let's talk about that. Okay. We'll practice our best Meghan Markle wave once again. Let's say goodbye to SWOT. Because again, we are setting a strategic direction for your organization that really needs to be singular and distinctive. How to get there? Well, we know today we have to be thinking about rivals, what they're doing, what they're planning, how they are attempting to appeal to the folks that you care the most about. What I focus on are shapers and drivers. Shapers and drivers. Yes, ladies, those are Spanx on the left. I had to go try to find a picture. And when I think about shapers and drivers, excuse me, my first question is, what will shape or drive customer choices? What's going to inform them, influence them, and then compel them to act? For me, it boils down to 2 questions. What matters and what matters most from your customer's mindset. That's going to drive the actions that your customer takes. We're also asking ourselves what will shape or drive competitor actions, right? If we're going to set a singular direction for your organization, we have to do it in the context of what your competitors are doing. And I know for many of us on the call, the word competition, like the word customer, might be a bit off-putting, but let's remember a couple of things. Number 1, your customer has the power of choice, and your customer is deciding if they want to engage with your organization or not, as they scan the other options available to them. That's where your competition comes in. And so as we think then about your competition, here's the thing. They care about your customers too. What's driving their actions? Your customers. Because they are also wanting to appeal to them for heart and mind share of market. And so if it all boils down to drivers and shapers, getting to the core of customer choices and competitor actions in pursuit of those same customers, let's talk about what those shapers and drivers might look like. In this case, colleagues, what I am suggesting is we say goodbye to the S and the W, the strengths and weaknesses, and we are focusing purely externally at your organization's competitive landscape and your operating environment. This is an update of the classic PEST analysis where we would look at political, economic, socio-demographic, and technological trends. Yes, I will be sharing the slides. Happy to do that. On the external side, especially this year with COVID and the crisis trifecta that we'll talk about, I think the biggest category that I pay attention to for my clients is people, not purely and singularly socio-demographics, because that won't get you enough information. We need to be looking at consumer trends and social behaviors. And so as we think about all things people, especially as we adopt that customer mindset, that's essential. Economic changes are vital to look at today, both in terms of long-term trends, as well as the distortive power of COVID. We'll talk about that. Public policy, you know, many of you on the webinar are working in spaces like food access, poverty reduction, arts and culture, higher education, other arenas. Public policy is driving us this year in ways that we haven't had to pay attention to in the same way as in prior years. Because in the past, we were all looking at technology, right? We were looking at what is the disruption, right? Who's going to do something that kind of disrupts everybody and gets us all off onto a new arc of performance. And just think about it, we're not talking about disruptive technologies. We're talking about the distortive power of COVID-19 and its impacts on our communities and our globe. And so when we think about public policy, especially public health policy, we're all keeping an eye on vaccines, mask mandates, and all kinds of other policy decisions that are impacting us every single day of our lives. The environment, finally, right, climate change, the environment is really top of mind today when we're setting strategy. It's becoming more important to organizations as we're thinking about managing risk, and we're seeing corporations and organizations of all sizes making lots of different decisions and changing their strategic direction because of the environment. And last but certainly not least, COVID-19. Not only in 2020, but probably for the next few years, we will be tracking COVID-19 as we update your external scan. Now, let's take a pause here, colleagues, and think about it in this way. If we were conducting a simple SWOT, right, 4-quad matrix basic bucketing, what would we do with COVID? Is it an opportunity or a threat? What about what's going on with public policy and a mask mandate? Is that an opportunity or a threat? It just simplifies it to the point where I think the trend itself, the condition, the force, loses its power to really inform your strategic decision-making. And after all, what we're talking about is really giving you all the information to get to the insights to drive your strategic direction. And you need the best tools and the best approaches to do that, especially today. So let's talk about shapers. Again, I classify things as shapers and drivers. Shapers have the power to shape your future direction. They'll kind of shape the trajectory that you can go in. In my opinion, these include long-range trends as well as external conditions. And so let's examine a couple here and we can talk about them more. A long-range trend might be social media adoption, right? This is the kind of thing that kind of increases over time when we think about the percentage of Americans or the percentage of people around the globe that own smartphones, for example. Those trends kind of continue on year after year after year. We see the same thing in socio-demographic trends, aging of the population, those sorts of things. They will shape your future, but they don't drive it per se. Another shaper, I believe, that we're experiencing right now is what appears to be the K-shaped economic recovery that we're experiencing. The continued steep bifurcation between people that have more means and people that have less access to opportunity. In that condition, that trend is going to be shaping your future. And so let's talk about drivers, and then we'll have a conversation about the two different categories. So when I think about a driver, and I love this little visual because it is a bit of an idea of hold on tight, they have the power to drive your organization's future. These are forces and distortions. And for my colleagues on the webinar, in higher education, in arts and culture in particular, you are dealing with this in real time right now. Both between public health mandates, both of your organizations are crippled in many ways by addressing the impact of COVID-19 and trying to figure out how you meet your customers where they are with increasing expectations, while you try to deliver what matters the most when you are stymied from doing things the way you used to. Let's talk a little bit about what drivers tend to look like. As I have been kind of foreshadowing, I categorize COVID as a distortion. It's not merely a disruption. It is changing things from before to after. And I think we're going to see, as we move forward as a society and as a global society, the continued distortive power of COVID. That we'll have pre-COVID, we'll have COVID, and we'll have a post-COVID world. This is, many of you have heard me say this, a crisis trifecta. We have a pandemic, economic, and social crisis happening simultaneously in the United States, which is distorting kind of our experiences and our opportunities. Here's a great example from McKinsey. In the United States, our e-commerce adoption accelerated 10 years in 3 months. That's a force. We aren't going backwards. And so when we think about a force like e-commerce adoption and what that acceleration has meant in such a short period of time, we can see that as a force that you simply must recognize as you are setting strategy for your organization. And so, kind of pulling this all together, I started out in this section talking about it all comes down to your customer. Your customer really cares about what matters most to them. And your competitors care deeply about what matters most to your customer. So as you are then scanning the external environment, looking for both shapers and drivers, sorry about that, there goes the ambulance, shapers and drivers. What I would encourage you to do is look for shapers and drivers in those 6 categories that we talked about: people, the economy, public policy, technology, the environment, and COVID-19. And really identify, knowing your customer, including those you don't serve as well as you would like to, and identify which of the shapers and the drivers will have the most profound impact on your organization, not only today, but forecasting out the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. That gets you a robust and interesting conversation that leads you to creativity and to insights and to wow. Let's pause here and see if we have any questions before we go on and talk a little bit about risks and how to avoid them. Any comments or questions so far? I'm giving you a lot to be thinking about. Oh, Harvey asked the question, the smartphone would not have been invented through SWOT. What creative process would lead to this? Harvey, I'd like to think this one would, right? If we look at consumer behaviors, the kinds of things that people really were hungry for, what was really driving their choices, and really adopting head and heart of customers. Anything else here? Shapers and drivers. All right, let's see if anybody else has anything. Tying this back together, this is what I love to say. SWOT was made for a simpler time, right? 2020 isn't simple. 2021 won't be simple either. So these are 4 risks that I want you to avoid as you set strategy for the future. Number 1, being left behind as your competitors adopt and adapt to changing customer preferences. Number 2, undervaluing your customer's power to determine the rules of engagement. Number 3, underestimating the threat of new entrants to your market, entrants that you don't even know about, but are quite frankly a keyword search away for your customer. And number 3, overestimating your organization's ability to navigate complex and rapid changes. Those, I believe, are in summary the 4 risks that you take on if you don't use a tool that's attuned to the times. So again, back to thinking about your customer, really sorting through shapers and drivers, the forces that can make the biggest difference, and identifying those with the power to not only influence and inform, but to direct decisions and actions, because that's what it all comes down to. All right, wow, this is quick and fun. So we're wrapping up now. I'm going to, excuse me, be able to give you a bit of time back in your busy day. This is how you can reach out to me, Karla, at Differentiation Zone. Would love to be engaging with you all. We're happy to take a few questions as we go, and very excited to let you know that I've written a book on strategy, bringing to life everything that I've been learning over the last 10 years in Differentiation Zone. And we will be publishing first quarter of next year. In fact, my designer just sent me cover art ideas today, and I need to go take a look this afternoon. So let's pause here. I'm in fact going to see if I can go backwards on my slides to this one and see if anybody has any questions for me before we go. And I thank you so much for your wonderful participation today. As we say again, goodbye to the SWOT and hello, shapers and drivers. And so, any more questions? Thank you all. Thank you all. Oh, what was the 4th risk? Backwards? Okay. Thank you, Tom. Overestimating your ability to navigate complex and rapid change. Again, SWOT was developed when, quite frankly, our economy was driven by oil and gas companies and major manufacturing, including automobiles. It's fascinating, right? None of those folks are on the list anymore, most likely. Thank you, everyone, so much. You know how to find me if you need me. Would love to engage with you again. Okay, question from Chantel. Thinking about shapers and drivers makes sense, but I'm wondering if you have suggestions for facilitating these complex conversations. Maybe this question is outside the scope. For me, Chantel, I think when I facilitate these kinds of conversations, I think it can be helpful to start out with, again, what we're offering today, simple framing, in helping folks to think about those forces that have the power to shape and to drive. I think it can be helpful to have some ideas or suggestions coming in, so folks can apply what they know from their own lived experience to this work. Because I think as we have a chance to think about for your organizations and who your customer is and what matters most to them, as we adopt their mindset and we view the world through their lens, it helps us to understand then which of those forces might make the biggest difference. And so that's what I do. I often allow a couple of different kind of conversations to occur, if you will. I find this work being iterative can be very helpful. To start out with kind of the, you can almost use a visual with those arrows, something that's bigger and more robust, and then kind of narrow in and think through what are the 3 to 5 that make the biggest difference, that if we pay attention to those can help us determine what to do. Okay, thank you, Suzanne. SWOT done the old way doesn't get us where we need to go. So thank you all so much. It was great to spend some time with you today. We will be making the webinar available and happy to share the slides as well. And so have a wonderful Wednesday. Look forward to seeing you all soon. Goodbye from Karla and the Differentiation Zone. Thank you so much.